Any big savings on Black Friday or Cyber Monday?
Have you seen Apple's?
Oh yeah, I heard their stock is 20% off.
Yeah, no, I was talking about their Black Friday deals, though.
Oh, okay. So do describe to me these Black Friday and Cyber Monday deals.
Well, they're giving away, well, not giving away. You're paying full price for last year's iPhone, but with a $50 gift card.
Sounds like a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously these Black Friday deals aren't really competitive, but I don't think anybody's ever expected Apple to compete on price. So as always, we're better off looking elsewhere for Black Friday and Cyber Monday deals. So yeah, no big savings for me either. Before we go any further, I'm going to introduce myself for our listeners. My name is Uluroo, and I am one of the co-hosts of this great podcast. And I'm joined today by the legendary Jason, who is my co-host. And we are here on episode 1 of The Flock, because what the world needs right now is another tech podcast. Now, Jason, tell me if you agree with me on how cool this would be if we had some theme music, and in post-production, you edited the theme music in right after the end of this sentence. Do you think that would be cool?
That would be cool.
All right. Now prove it and add the theme music. So now that that's out of the way, let's move on to our next topic. As I alluded to earlier, Apple's stock is 20% off for this discount weekend. And it's no longer a $1 trillion company. It's been in kind of this fight over market capitalization with Microsoft, which at first everybody was like, okay, Microsoft passed Apple in market evaluation. And then everybody was like, actually, no, they didn't. And right now it seems kind of convoluted as to which one is actually more valuable. But basically, Apple hasn't been doing so well, and neither has the rest of the tech sector. So, Jason, what do you think is the biggest cause of this?
Probably lower iPhone sales than Apple was expecting.
As shown by supply chain reports, the ever-reliable supply chain is saying, a lot of Apple suppliers are saying that they've been cutting orders and they're forecasting lower revenue and profits than they were originally expected to. So everybody is now being led to believe that Apple is experiencing lower iPhone demand than expected. And I actually don't know if this is the whole story, because I was reading a Twitter thread by Ian Betteridge, who said something that I think is really interesting, which is that Apple has several different suppliers for each of the components that it uses in iPhones, and it constantly shifts its orders up and down between as many suppliers. So one supplier's forecasts aren't necessarily enough to determine whether demand is as high as Apple expects. Now, they definitely could be experiencing lower demand, but I don't know if we have enough information to decide that that's actually happening or that it's really significant. So do you think that iPhone sales are flat, or that they're just that they're actually declining?
I think they're declining a little bit, but I think as long as they can keep up with kind of what people want in the iPhone, they can bring it back up.
Yeah, and I think that they're making up for any losses in unit sales with the greater margins in revenue. So I think it kind of balances out, even if iPhone sales are down slightly. And even in the last quarter, they did grow year over year. They just didn't grow by as much as analysts were expecting. So I think we're either going to see them flatten out or decline a tiny bit, but it's not like it's going to be a plunge. I think it's going to go down and then plateau again. And I think that Apple's going to make up for it again with higher margins. So let's talk about the fact that Apple is no longer reporting unit sales of the iPhone, iPad, and Mac. What do you think of that?
They could just be hiding that they're selling less than they thought they would.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that seems to be the prevailing theory. I think that that definitely is a possibility, but I think what's more likely is that it might be a combination of that, and they want investors to keep their focus where Apple wants it to be, which is on their strengths like margins and revenue. Apple's strength has never really been in unit sales. It's always been in getting a lot of money. And I think that Apple's still going to continue to be a very profitable company. So Apple is preparing for the next stage in the iPhone's development, for which it's not growing massively in unit sales, but it still can receive greater margins and higher revenue. So I think, again, it's sort of a thing that balances out, and I think eventually investors will get over it. So do you think that investors will get over it, or do you think that Apple's going out of business?
I think investors will get over it pretty quickly, actually.
Yeah. I think that if the next quarter, if the holiday quarter is better than expected, because they've been forecasting slightly lower revenue than investors thought they would forecast. So a lot of expectations seem to have been missed. But if Apple does have a decent quarter, then I think investors will probably get over their kind of scare over the lack of unit sales being reported. I think that what's really causing Apple stock to go down is low sales of the AirPower charging mat. I think investors were really expecting a huge, like, super cycle of upgrades, and they didn't really achieve that. I think AirPower is pretty disappointing so far.
Wait, is that out?
No, it is not. It has been missing in action for over a year now, since September of 2017. So what do you think happened to it? Do you think it's like engineering problems, or they just forgot about it?
I'm thinking engineering problems because it's a wireless charging pad that doesn't have like hotspots on it.
Right.
You can just place the device anywhere, and that's something that you haven't really seen any of.
Yep, it's never happened before. There have been multi-device charging pads, but they haven't had the ability to place the device anywhere. There are certain spots on them that get better charging than others. So AirPower is the first of its kind, really, and that's kind of proven to be a problem for Apple's engineers. Apparently, AirPower is having thermal issues because it has several charging coils inside the mat. And so basically what happens is it kind of tends to catch on fire or overheat. So that must be a fun experience in Apple's labs. So do you think that Apple's ever going to release it? They did kind of remove all the mentions of it from their website.
I sure hope they do. It would be really cool to see that.
Yeah.
Although it is in the manuals for the new iPhone, so
Yes,
they haven't completely removed all reference.
Yeah. And it kind of makes you wonder whether the reference to it in the manuals was on accident or if they know that they're going to be releasing it soon. Ming-Chi Kuo, a very reliable Apple analyst, is predicting that it'll be launched by spring of 2019, basically. So I kind of believe this rumor because it seems like they want to launch it eventually. And it just makes sense that they would want to launch it ASAP because they haven't been able to deliver on the timeline that they promised, which was launching in 2018. And unless they launch it within the next month and 3 days, because we're recording on Wednesday, November 28th, they are not meeting up with the promise that they made, which was that they would ship it in 2018. So I think that they want to get it out as soon as possible. For now, they're trying to make people forget about it, but they're preparing for it to launch. And I think soon we might see some software hints. I don't know. What do you think it'll cost?
I'm thinking in the neighborhood of between 100 and about 200, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. I think one of the rumors said 149. I think 149 sounds about right to me. I'm gonna bet that it's 149. I bet you $149 that it's 149. And if you're right if you're right that it might be cheaper, then you'll have some money left over after you buy one. So. Do you think that will launch alongside updated AirPods with a wireless charging case?
That would make the most sense to me.
Yeah, I agree. Even if the AirPods are essentially the same, maybe they'll just get a new chip like K-Series support or something. I think that they'll mostly be the same, but they'll have the wireless charging case. I would not be surprised if they did that and still had a more significant update to them in the fall. I think they just want to have the accessory available. I think those, I'm not sure. I think they might cost something like $179 because the current ones cost $159, and if they're adding that pretty significant feature, which is wireless charging, I think that they would bump it up by $20. And do you think they'll sell the case separately from the AirPods?
They probably will.
Yeah,
maybe $50.
Yeah, I think like 49, maybe 39. 39 seems kind of low because if you're adding $20 for purchasing AirPods with the case, because $179 from $159. Then I think it makes sense for it to be slightly more expensive as a separate accessory. But I don't know how much they'll try to get out of the users. But it would make it appeal more to people who own older AirPods. On the other hand, it could serve as an upsell to getting new AirPods if you want the wireless charging case, and that's your only option. So, what do you think that some of the improvements are that Apple would make to updated AirPods? Like if they were doing a full refresh rather than just adding the wireless charging case.
Well, my first wish would be space gray.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Definitely space gray, but probably battery life after that, and then Hey Siri support. And then,
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, my
yeah.
phone just went off.
Yeah, that happens so often when I'm like talking about that feature and I say the word and then phone goes off. I think that Hey Siri support will be included. Good, phone didn't go off. I think that they might even get touch sensitivity similar to the Apple Pencil. The current AirPods have accelerometers, which respond to being like physically moved when you tap them, but they're not capacitive, so they don't respond to like swipes or anything like that. And the Apple Pencil 2, or they're not even calling it the 2, which they should have called it the number 2. But the latest generation of Apple Pencil has touch sensitivity, and I think we'll see something like that with AirPods, where you can like maybe even slide up on it to adjust the volume, swipe forward to go forward a track. I don't know, but I think touch sensitivity would make it more elegant than just having an accelerometer built in. I also think some level of water resistance will happen. Like, what do you think about that? Like, do you think they'll go for like full water resistant or just like splash resistant?
I think they might just go with splash resistant.
Yeah, that seems to make sense.
Yeah, because I don't think you'd really be swimming with AirPods in
Right.
your ears.
But I mean, like, to survive, like, I mean, nobody swims with their iPhone either, but it's nice if it can survive like a dunk in water. But I suppose, like, I think even current AirPods are pretty durable. Like, I saw a tweet a few months ago. Somebody had like dropped their AirPods down like an 11-story elevator shaft, and they were fine. They just got a little dinged up. So AirPods are pretty durable for their size and apparent delicateness. But yeah, I agree that the number one feature I would want is space gray. Like, space gray is the best. So you think between 100 and 200 for AirPower? Well, I mentioned I think AirPods will be 179. What do you think?
I think that's a reasonable price based on what they cost this year.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of a logical bump up. Another interesting theory is, could the AirPods go completely inductive charging and ditch any ports?
I think they could do that real easy.
Yeah. And if that happens, do you think that they will ship it with an Apple Watch style magnetic charger? Like a little disc that you place it on?
I would hope. I wouldn't want to buy AirPods and then not have a charger for it.
Yeah, I hope they would do something like that. And another possibility is that, like, I was talking with a few people on Twitter about this, and some people think that it would make sense if they charged inductively from the back of an iPhone.
That would be pretty cool.
It could be interesting, although it would be kind of inconvenient because you couldn't use your iPhone that well. It would just be a huge lump on the back, which I guess isn't much worse than the smart battery case, which I do use. So, I mean, I just think it would be kind of less elegant than it sounds. Let's see.
Although there is a phone that does wirelessly charge other devices too, so it wouldn't be brand new.
Yeah, I think I saw something about that.
The Huawei Mate 20 Pro does that. So.
Okay, yeah, that's it. So, yeah, I think that the next AirPods are going to have, I think they'll have a lightning port still. I think inductive is too early on as a technology to be any more than an option. I think if it were the exclusive way to charge, it would kind of anger a lot of people. They would just be like, why can't I use my lightning cable with it? And actually, speaking of why can't I use my lightning cable with it, let's talk about... Actually, wait, before we move on, I just want to point out that Apple should have called AirPower Apple Juice. All right, now we can move on. Speaking of why can't I charge that with a lightning cable, let's talk about USB-C on iPhones potentially. Do you think that the iPhone should or will get a USB-C port next year?
I think it's a possibility, since the iPad has it.
So would you like that better than Lightning?
I think I would, although I do not own a single USB-C cable, so...
Me neither. MagSafe for life. So I think most people think that consistency between their devices is the biggest benefit of USB-C, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, the thing that I would say in response to people who want a USB-C iPhone is that for most people, you don't get consistency with a USB-C port. The vast majority of MacBooks and iPads that are out there right now do not have USB-C. They have MagSafe and USB-A ports. So the majority of iPhone users don't even own an iPad or MacBook, let alone one that is compatible with USB-C. And the ones who don't, who make up the vast majority of iPhone users, would probably be pretty ticked off if Apple made another port change. People were really ticked off when Apple switched from 30 pin to Lightning, and they were really ticked off when Apple ditched the headphone jack. And I think that both of those transitions were good, but the thing is that when USB-C happens, and by the time the dust settles after that transition, we're not going to be very far out from completely wireless iPhones. So do you think that the iPhone is ever going to ditch ports altogether and go wireless?
I think in a couple of years, it's definitely a possibility.
Yeah, I think 3 or 4 years from now. And the point is that if Apple does a USB-C transition, sure, that would be good for a lot of people, but not enough people would be able to be benefited by that for it to be worth making 2 transitions over the course of like 5 years. So if the 2019 iPhone gets USB-C and then the 2021 or 2022 iPhone goes completely wireless, people are getting annoyed twice in a row, and that's in pretty quick succession. And I don't think that Apple wants to make people any angrier than it has to. Also, another thing to consider with this is, do you think that over-the-air wireless charging is close to being a real thing, like close enough that it's worth considering in this discussion?
I don't think it's close enough to consider yet, but I don't think it's terribly far off either.
Yeah, I agree. It's not a consumer product in any form that I can think of. Maybe there's like a startup somewhere, but I don't think that it's definitely not being mass produced. And I think that maybe the inductive only iPhone will come at a time when over-the-air wireless charging makes sense. And once wireless charging is truly wireless, when you don't have to have a pad in order to charge, I think then it's going to be much more viable and it's going to make more sense to people. I still think that Apple's going to ship the inductive-only iPhones, if they ever happen, with an Apple Watch-style magnetic charger that just like snaps onto the back of the device. I don't think they'll ship them with a big wireless charging mat. I think that'll be an accessory that's available, like AirPower. Do you think they'll ever make a version of AirPower that's just intended for one device? Smaller AirPower Mini?
I don't think they will. I think like a multi-device pad is the most useful.
Yeah.
Because if you own an iPhone, you probably have an Apple Watch. Not everybody.
It's definitely a pretty big percentage.
It's growing. Mm-hmm. So if you having to use 2 chargers for 2 devices,
right?
When you have the option to use one charger for both devices,
and especially for like,
I think that would be the better option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially for like families who own iPhones. Like even if you just own one device, it's easier if like all the devices in the family can be on one charger. So yeah, I agree. I don't think they're going to get into that market because I don't think that they can compete very well in the single wireless charger market because it would be much more expensive than the alternatives, and I don't think it would offer a significant enough feature set to convince most people to buy that and instead of a cheaper alternative. All right, so let's take a break from that topic for a second and go back to another rumor that's circulating in the supply chain. Do you think that Apple is resuming production of the iPhone X?
I think they might be. I don't really understand why they would do it for just one country. It's rumored that they're doing it just for Japan.
Oh, really? Okay, I didn't see that.
That's what I've seen.
Okay, that would also that makes it even less believable. All right. Yeah, if it's just for Japan, then I definitely don't believe it. If it's for worldwide sale, I still don't believe it because I don't know what price point they would put it at that wouldn't be too competitive with Apple's current devices. Like if they priced it at $899, I think a lot of people would buy it instead of the iPhone XS.
Although $899 is still more expensive than the base iPhone XR.
Right, that's true. I think you compete with the XS more than the XR actually, just because it's even less distinguishable from that device.
Yes.
People are like, oh well, what's better about the XS that's worth another $100? So I don't believe it. I don't buy it. I think this is not a true rumor. And I mean, like 95% of the rumors that circulate are not in fact true. I don't think we have to worry about Apple being so desperate that it's resuming production of last year's product for reasons that are not really apparent. I think it would make more sense, like, if they were really desperate, they would just drop the price of the XS. And yeah, that would make them look weak, but putting the iPhone 10 back into production also makes them look weak. I don't think that they're going to do that. And I saw a report just this evening that said that Apple has been saying the iPhone XR has been the best-selling iPhone since it launched. And I don't think they have any reason to lie about that. I don't think they want to lie to their investors. I definitely think that this is going to turn out to be a situation like how the iPhone 10 was supposedly the worst-selling iPhone, but it was actually the best-selling iPhone. I think the XR is more of a success than people are realizing or are willing to realize.
Yeah.
All right, so that's it about the iPhone 10. Let's talk more about, we were talking about USB-C, right, and wireless charging.
Yes.
So would you buy or would you want a wireless iPhone if it were launched this year? Like, do you think that we're at a stage yet where we can afford to lose all ports altogether?
I don't think yet. I don't own a single wirelessly charging device, so that would be a very big transition if they did that.
The problem is that it takes a pretty big investment in other things in order to make it work. So, like, you'd have to have a decent wireless charger, you'd have to get wireless headphones, and although those things are available for cheap, it might not be as good of an experience as even using Apple's own Lightning cables. I have an iPhone 7, which does not charge wirelessly, but I think that it's good that the inductive iPhones that Apple ships now still have Lightning as the primary method of charging. I think that they're going to keep wireless charging as an option until it's worth it, until they have a meaningful reason to tell people, okay, we're not going to let you have a port anymore. I think I think that losing the Lightning port or losing the USB-C port, whichever one comes first, it's going to be seen as a huge deal. Like, whichever port is the last one to get axed, consumers are not going to be happy about that. But just like with the headphone jack, I think they'll get used to it. I hope, because I definitely think that wireless stuff is the future. I just don't know how far out that is, or whether that lines up with how far out Apple thinks that is. Speaking of things that might not be as far out as we think, let's talk about ARM Macs. Do you think Apple wants to make ARM Macs?
I think they want to, so that they can put their own custom silicon into their computers.
Yep, I agree. All right, moving right along. No, actually, let's stick with this topic for a little bit. So when do you think that the first ARM Mac is going to launch?
I don't think this year. I'm thinking maybe next year.
By this year, do you mean 2018?
28.
Okay.
I mean, 2019.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I doubt that they would have another
this coming
event
year.
Yeah, I am also thinking 2019, and I think it's going to be the 12-inch MacBook, because once that gets updated, people are going to realize why it exists in Apple's lineup. Like right now, because it hasn't been updated in a year and a half, its purpose is kind of convoluted. People are like, well, it doesn't have as good of a processor, but it has a sleeker design. And I think that eventually, it's like next year, maybe at WWDC, it's going to get a better processor and an even sleeker design. And it's going to be sort of like how the iPhone 10 was the futuristic iPhone. This will be the futuristic MacBook for the people who want to be on the bleeding edge. I think that it's going to launch probably next year. I think maybe the MacBook Pros in October of next year will get ARM chips, because when WWDC shows up, Apple is basically going to be saying, if not explicitly, that it's planning on making the ARM transition across the entire lineup. So developers are going to have time to make the transition with their own apps. I also think that it makes sense for ARM Macs to launch at the same time as Marzipan, Apple's cross-platform development project for running iOS apps on Macs. Marzipan is a discussion for another time. I hate it. I hate the apps that have been ported from the iPhone to the Mac. Like, I hate them so much, and I think that Apple should cancel the project. I don't think that they're well designed. I think they're the opposite of what a good Mac app should be. But that can be saved for a later episode, because we don't want to use all our good talking points this time. So I think that but strategically it makes sense for them to launch Macs that are running on similar processors to the iPhone as they get ready to give Macs software that is similar to the iPhone and an iPad. I think that Apple's ARM chips are at the point where if they put even more effort into them than they have previously, I think when they're putting their own chips, when they're putting their own chips into the devices they see as like real powerful computers, even more so than the iPad Pro, I think, they will be able to hit it out of the park on performance and thermal management and everything that will allow them to eventually slim Macs down even further to make them even more competitive on design. Like right now, the MacBook Air is one of Apple's thinner laptops, and even that is not as thin as the competition goes. But I think that once Apple is free from Intel's bondage, it will be able to do things with engineering and design that it hasn't been able to do before. But I don't know. I think that it's going to be the 12-inch MacBook. I think that the Mac Pro will be the last one to get an ARM chip, probably in 2020. I don't know. I think that it's going to happen faster than we're expecting. And we'll talk a bit more about that in the next talking point. And speaking of our next talking point, let's talk about Apple's modern design language. So it's some quick background, real quick. The modern design language was introduced with the iPhone X, and I'm calling it the modern design language because in software, the iPhone X was referred to as the modern iPhone. And up until then, we had what one might call the classic iPhone, which had large top and bottom bezels and the home button. And nowadays, though, we're seeing the modern iPhones and even the modern iPads. And those have shared some characteristics. And those include thinner bezels, Face ID, specifically the True Depth camera system, which enables more than just Face ID, and also gesture navigation. And I think that the first modern Macs are going to show up pretty soon. I think that the 12-inch MacBook will not only be the first ARM Mac, but the first modern Mac. I think that it's going to have thinner bezels, and I think it will support the True Depth camera system and emoji, things like that. And I don't think it's going to have anything like gesture navigation. I don't think it'll get a touchscreen. I think that instead of a touchscreen, instead of gesture navigation, the modern Mac is going to have ARM chips. I think that's going to be the third feature of the modern Mac computers. So is there anything else that you can think of that the modern iPhone has had, other than the notch, which hasn't really been shared between the products?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Maybe no. I was thinking different materials, but that was only on the iPhone.
Yeah,
they use
iPhone
stainless
10
steel. The iPad is still aluminum.
Yeah, true. There have definitely been some differences across the product lineup, but the general idea has been thinner bezels and Face ID. I think those are the two key features of the modern Apple design language. And I think that we're going to see both of those key things, but not the third thing, which is gesture navigation on the 12-inch MacBook next year. Do you think when do you think the modern transition will happen? Do you think it'll be at the same time as ARM?
Hopefully in the next 1 to 2 years. I would really like to see a redesign in how they look.
Yeah. I think it's going to happen next year, and I think it'll end probably in 2020 as well. So I've been saying that the ARM transition and the modern transition on the Mac are going to end in 2020. And the reason I think that they will coincide with one another is that in 2020, Apple's going to be launching its augmented reality headset, Apple Glasses or whatever it calls it. And I think it makes sense for them to essentially tidy up and perfect the designs of their current, more traditional products like the iPhone, Mac, and iPad before they launch the next big thing, the next one more thing that sets the tone for the next decade of technology. So I think that if they get rid of the notch, if they make the bezels thinner on Macs, they'll essentially be able to say, okay, we've sort of made these devices as good as they can get. Because I don't think that the iPhone is going to see many more design improvements, maybe aside from eventually removing the camera bump, but until they can defy physics, I don't see how that's going to happen. If they can say, okay, we've made these products as good as we can get them, then they're going to be able to put a lot more effort and attention into perfecting like the operating system and hardware of their next big product category, which will be Apple Glasses, presumptively named. Yeah, I think it's going to end in 2020. It could be as late as 2021, but I think that soonish is when I expect to see these transitions happen. Soonish. That's my verdict. So what do you think? Do you think that when do you think the last Mac is going to get the modern design language?
Probably the Mac Pro or the Mac Mini in 2020. like early 2020.
Okay. Those are, I don't know if they can really modernize the design of those. Do you mean just like making it look better, or do you mean like the displays that would go along with it?
Probably the displays as well. I
Okay.
forgot about that. But they can probably do something with the looks, because the Mac Mini is the same as it's been pretty much since they first released it.
Yeah, true.
They
can make it more compact. Yeah.
the Mac Pro,
Is a trash
it's
can.
just a round, it's a cylinder.
It's a trash can.
Yeah.
It's a HomePod that doesn't support Siri, and it comes in jet black. It looks like it's jet black, even though they didn't have the name jet black back then. So yeah, I think that does make sense. I think the next Mac Pro is going to look different than the current one, and we know that's launching in 2019. But maybe it'll continue to be perfected and refined in 2020. That makes sense to me. I think that the iMac Pro, which I'm going to assume will be either announced or launched at WWDC of next year, I think that's going to have either Face ID or thinner bezels, or both. Also, same for their Pro Display, but I don't think the Pro Display is going to have Face ID, just thinner bezels. I think those are going to be modernized. One thing I'm trying to figure out is whether I think they will have rounded corners on Mac displays. It doesn't seem right with the menu bar and everything.
Yeah.
But the iPad Pro doesn't have a huge corner radius, so maybe it would just be kind of a sharper corner than the iPhones.
Yeah.
And speaking of Mac screens, I did some mathematical calculations, courtesy of the Pythagorean theorem, and found that if Apple essentially modernizes the MacBooks specifically, and gives them side bezels that are the same width as those on the iPad Pro, which are about 9 millimeters, they could increase the screen sizes by almost an inch all around. So the diagonals would go up significantly. Like the 12-inch MacBook would have a 13-inch screen in the same form factor, which I think we're going to see happen next year. Because they can't shrink the chassis of the 12-inch MacBook. The keyboard already stretches to the very edge of the device. So if they made it any smaller, they would shrink the keyboard. I think they'll make the screen bigger. So they'll have three different models of 13-inch MacBooks, but one of them will be about design, one of them will be about performance, and one of them will be about affordability and like accessibility to other consumers. So I think it'll kind of make sense, but it'll make more sense when the MacBook Pros get updated, and those could go from having 13 and 15-inch diagonals to 14 and 16-inch diagonals. I'm very interested to see if my math is right, because I did some math about the iPad Pro diagonals, and I was very wrong. I thought they would be like 0.2 inches bigger on the diagonal than they actually were, but I was overestimating how thin the bezels would be. So what do you expect the like modern MacBook to look like? Do you think it'll have like really thin bezels and Face ID and stuff?
I think it'll have thin bezels, definitely Face ID. I would really like to see that, because Windows Hello has had that for a year maybe.
I think it's been more than a year. It's been a few years.
Yeah.
I'm not sure though, because I'm not a Windows history person. I'm an Apple user. So a lot of people have been saying things like Apple's designs aren't innovative anymore. And I think pretty soon we're going to see just how different everything is going to look than it used to. Like we're going to look back in 5 years and be like, wow, that's what everything used to look like. And I think it's going to be pretty great. I'm excited to see what comes next. I'm quite the Apple sheep. So my hopes are high for the designs. I definitely think, I still have some concerns about how thin they want the keyboards to be. Like, I prefer key travel, and I think I would certainly get used to a thin keyboard with low travel, like the butterfly keyboard. But I don't know, I just really like, having key travel, and I don't know if a thin keyboard can ever match the user experience of a high travel keyboard. That's like the one like thing that's been holding me back from being like completely on board with these new designs. But I know I would get used to it. I think that the next big thing for the Mac is really, though, inductive charging.
Yeah.
I think that will be amazing. That would be so terrible, actually. And imagine a portless MacBook. They're already pretty close with the 12-inch MacBook, which just has a single USB-C port. So that's everything that's happened in technology last week, right? All right. Anything we missed? Any glaring, interesting stories you read?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Kind of quiet around the tech world. I think one reason that we haven't been seeing that much news lately is that all of the tech sites have been like just spewing a constant fire hose of Black Friday and Cyber Monday deals.
Yep.
And it's just a bunch of affiliate links and ads, and the web is a mess. The internet is terrible, guys. Just get off the internet.
Agreed.
So, yeah. Technology is fun. Except for the internet. So, Apple's stock is currently not doing too well, but don't worry, everything's going to be fine because investors will get over the quick scare. AirPower and AirPods updates are kind of MIA. We don't know where they are or what they'll cost or anything like that, but we want them in space gray. I think AirPower should also be in space gray.
Oh, yes.
And USB-C and Lightning, most people aren't going to receive the same benefits from USB-C as the nerds who own USB-C devices, because the majority of Mac laptops out there are not USB-C compatible. And then ARM Macs, probably maybe next year, maybe the year after, we don't know, 2019 to 2020-ish. Soonish, I think is what I might have said. And then the modern design language, which is cool. So what we've learned is that everything's cool.
Yeah.
All right, good talk.